Hey, what's up guys? This is Ankush Sharma and today I am back with another video that is debounce function in JavaScript. Here in this video you will see what is debounce function, where should you use it and how you can implement it from scratch in JavaScript. So let's get started. Cool, so let's see what is a debounce function. So debounce function is a function that makes sure that your function gets executed after a certain time, and in between that waiting time no other request should come to execute your function again. So in other words, let's suppose you have a function and you know that there can be multiple requests can come to execute that function, and the last request will be enough to complete your use case. That means all other previous requests are completely wasted. So how you can optimize this scenario? You can use a debounce function here. Debounce function will take the latest request, will wait for a certain time, and in between that time if no other request comes, it will execute that function. But if another request comes in between that waiting time, it will discard the previous request, register the latest request, and again it will repeat the same logic. So let's see one example now. The very common example of the debounce function is auto suggest search box. If you see in my screen here we have bigbasket.com, right? And let's search something here. First I will search cooker, and you can see here in the network request they are sending API with cooker only. They are not sending the request with C, CO, COO, COOK. They are taking the payload, waiting for some time, and then sending the request. Let's again search with, let's suppose, rice. Again you can see here I typed rice completely, then they wait for some time, and then they request for the suggested products. Let's try another time. Let's search onion now. See, I typed O and I, they send one request with O and I, and now I will complete this sentence O and, now they will again send the request with onion completely. So see how they have implemented their auto suggest search bar. They are taking the input from the user, waiting for some time, and then sending the request to the backend. So internally they are using the debounce function here. Let's come to the implementation now. First we will see the requirement and then we will go for the implementation of debounce function. Let's suppose you have a function send request that you want to debounce. So let's create it. And this send request function takes the payload, and we will make it simple. We will just console whatever the payload we are going to pass to this function. So now we want to debounce this send request function. So we will take debounced send request, and we will pass send request function to debounce function that we are going to implement. So send request we will pass to this one, and in the second parameter we will specify the time for which we want to wait. So let's suppose we want to wait for 2 seconds. And next we will call the debounced send request with different payloads. First we will call it with 1, or we will take the example of auto suggest search bar only. So let's suppose we are passing R first, then we are passing RI, and then we will pass RIC, and then we will pass RICE. So now what is happening, we are requesting this send request to get execute with R, with RI, with RIC, and with RICE. So here what we are doing, we are calling send request through debounce function, with payload R, with payload RI, with payload RIC, and with payload RICE. So now these statements are going to be executed one by one, right? And this is like within 2 seconds. So in the end, only with payload RICE should be executed, right? So this is our requirement, and now we will implement our debounce function. So as you know, debounce function is the function. So here we will take this, and it is taking two parameters. One is the function that we want to execute, and the waiting time. One more thing is very clear here. This debounce function is going to return me another function. So I will return another function here, and this return function also expect the arguments. So we will take the arguments here, and this return function is going to execute the requested function. So this statement is also clear. So here we will pass the arguments as the parameter. So one thing to note here, we need to bind the context also with this function. So what we will do, we will use the apply method, and we will pass this context, and then we will pass the arguments. So these arguments are coming as an array, so we will pass it like this. But our debounce function is going to execute this function with a waiting time. So we will keep this function execution under the set timeout with a waiting time specified. But we need to implement the logic where another request comes to execute this function. We need to discard the previous request and then wait for the new request, right? So to handle that, what we can do, we can take one variable that will be let timer, and what we will do, whenever we are executing our debounced function, the return one, we will clear the timeout, and we will pass the return value of set timeout in timer. So let's see how it is going to execute. So let's see, when we are calling debounce send request with R, it will execute this function with the arguments, right? And it will execute clear timeout with timer, and timer is undefined here, so nothing will happen. And in the next statement, it will execute set timeout with the function that we are calling here with the wait time. So that is fine. So it will wait for 2 seconds. After 2 seconds, it is going to execute this function, but immediately we send another request with payload RI. So it will clear the previous time set timeout, and it will execute the new statement again, set timeout, with the same function call with a waiting time of 2 seconds. Again, we will call this function with payload RIC. So it will execute this function here. So it will clear that timeout, and it will execute the new statement set timeout with the payload RIC, and again wait for 2 seconds. Then immediately we call debounce send request with RICE. So again it will call the clear timeout, and here the timer is the previous one that was with RIC. It will be cleared, and then again it will execute the set timeout with the payload RICE, and then wait for 2 seconds. Now if we are not calling debounced send request again, it will wait for 2 seconds and then execute the function. Let's try now. See, it wait for 2 seconds and then it print payload rise. So it executes a function only with the payload RICE. So this is our debounce function here. I will give you one more example here where we will see how this context binding is helping us to execute this function properly. So let's suppose here we have one object with some payload, let's suppose ABC, and then we have send request, and that is debounced one. So let's suppose debounce and send request, we will take the same with the timeout of 2 seconds again. Now let's try to execute this send request with this object. And we will do one more thing. This time we will read the payload not from the parameters but from this object. So the expectation is like we want to read the payload from this object, and we will comment this part here. See, here we are getting payload ABC. That means it is reading from object itself. And if you are wondering what will happen if we are not binding this with our function, so we will see that also. We will remove apply, we will pass the arguments here, and let's try to execute it now. It will give you undefined here. See, undefined is coming. And if you try to print only this here, let's see what you get. You will get the window object here. See, so that's why we need to bind this with our function also. I will remove that. I will uncomment this part. Cool. So this is the debounce function. Hope you like this video. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and for the new content please subscribe to my channel. So that's it for now. See you guys again. Bye.